The October issue of Exceptional Parent magazine focuses on the transitioning from work to school for teenagers and young adults with ADHD. The transition from school to work can be especially challenging for teenagers and young adults with ADHD, as their symptoms can make it difficult to thrive in fast-paced and structured work environments. To read more, sign up for free today at www.epmagazine.com.
Hi, baby. I'm back. You see, I only replace her. I replace you so you can play Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Really good.
Where's Dad?
I'm your daddy now.
Oh. Hello, Daddy.
I like that.
Mittens is stuck again.
Mittens, you did this to yourself.
Sir, can you please just unlock the doors?
Just give me 5 stars. Now get the hell out of my car. Tacos, anyone? No! Blessings and gifts for all.
Your Holiness!
Kiss your own baby, lady. Bless. Call of Duty Black Ops is back.
Oscar Mike Radio is a proud podcast partner of Wreaths Across America Radio, heard every Thursday at 11 a.m. and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. They're also big supporters of the nonprofit I Got Your Six, 2 Lives at Once. And with every wreath you sponsor through Oscar Mike Radio, $5 goes back to this great organization dedicated to making a difference in the lives of veterans, law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders battling PTSD. 2 Lives at Once pairs these brave men and women together with dogs rescued from kill shelters. In this way, 2 lives are saved at the same time by saving each other. Donate now. Go to wreathsacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio to help. That's wreathsacrossamerica.org/Oscar Mike Radio.
Suicide is preventable, and each of us has a role to play in suicide prevention. Suicide is complex. There is no single cause, and it's not always a mental health issue. It could be loss of a job or home, financial or relationship issues, pain, or leaving the military. Suicide does not discriminate. It affects all ages, races, and genders, veterans or not. If you know a veteran who is struggling, connect with them. Let them know help is available. There is quick and easy access to services in times of crisis. Dial 988, then press 1. Talking about it is okay. Don't keep it inside. Don't be ashamed. Don't wait. Reach out. Find resources at va.gov/reach.
Hello and welcome again to Oscar Mike Radio. My name is Travis. I'm your host. Oscar Mike Radio is part of the Hubazoo Network. You can find out more on hubazoo.com. I want to thank my sponsors, Joyce Asak of Asak Real Estate, Army National Guard veteran Mark Holmes, Reapers Detailing Power Washing, and my supporters, Case On Shaving Company and Exceptional Parent Magazine. Thank you both. We're rolling down the end of the year. I've got my little Olimar thing on. I'm all nice and warm and toasty in the studio here. And I'm pleased to be joined by another Marine. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but when I was in the Marine Corps, we called them WMs, women Marines. That's what they want to be called. But now she's just a Marine. Old habits die hard. I might let a WM slip in there once or twice, but Chesty has approved this conversation. So here we go. I want to welcome Marine Corps veteran, mom, public affairs extraordinaire expert, and host of the Oath We Took podcast, which is coincidentally about Marines, Tabitha Bartley. Welcome to the Oscar Mike Radio Show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on and full circle, right? After having you on the Oath We Took podcast. It's fun to hop on somebody else's. It's
different being on the other side of the mic, isn't it?
It is. It is.
So from the halls of Monte, we're not going to sing the Marine Corps anthem, although it would be appropriate. But of all the things that we could do in life, what pointed you toward the Marine Corps, Tabitha?
I actually love this question because I don't think I ever met a recruiter in high school. I had no aspirations to do anything involving the military. I was actually into show choir, theater arts, and was a 21st century scholarship recipient in Indiana, which means I was able to go to college essentially for free when one day wasn't sure 100% what I wanted to do and was going to community college before, figuring it out and going to your larger institution. A recruiter called and said, "Hey, you want to come in the office and talk?" Just must have caught me on a good day because I was like, well, I guess, sure. But there's like, no way I'm going to join the Marine Corps. Like, it's not happening. And so get in there, and Gunnery Sergeant Rodriguez, I will never forget him. He starts talking about the New York Yankees. He is from the Bronx. I was a massive Yankees fan, and we were talking, the Derek Jeter, Bernie Williams era of, in my opinion, the best. Also to live through as a kid, right? And then he starts talking about, just like the tangibles, right? Or the intangibles, not the tangibles. And he first told me about public affairs and the job, which, photography and public speaking and journalists and all these things. And I was like, you could do that in the Marine Corps? Like, what? That sounds awesome. And then, so like I was vibing it a little bit, but still just like, meh. And then he tells me the story, which to this day, I have no idea if this story's true. It doesn't matter. Okay. Like, it just preface. My recruiter was the most amazing recruiter. Okay. But he tells this story. And in high school, when I was in high school, Darfur was happening. We were learning about, genocides pretty heavily and like those type of things. And he was talking about how on one of his humanitarian missions he had been on, he was at this location where all the branches were there, and they called in the Air Force, and what they wanted was they wanted to get provisions to civilians without shots being fired. So they called in the Air Force, and shots were fired at them. So, they came back. They called in the Army, and shots were fired at them, and they came back. And then they called his unit of Marines in, and shots were not fired because of what the uniform meant. And they knew what the uniform meant. And so, again, to this day, I have no idea if that was a true story. But again, it doesn't matter because what it signifies is true, right? Like, that is like our uniform, our EGA, it is globally recognized and has a reputation.
Isn't the EGA, the Marine Corps, the ultimate like branding success story?
Yeah, it is. It's the second most recognizable brand in the entire world, second only to McDonald's arches.
Get out.
Mm-hmm. Or at least back in 2018. I guess that stat could be wrong, but when I was, on recruiting duty, that was the truth.
Well, makes sense. Why let the truth get in the way of a good story? But
again, as other people who have stories, their recruiters lying to them about other things, like, I'll take that. If that story wasn't true, I'll take that one, right? But exactly. No, my recruiter was amazing, and it was, at that time they weren't actively recruiting for females, so I was just kind of like a bonus. I was what was on like a recruiter supply name, and I remember, being like, well, I'm not going to join the Marine Corps unless I get public affairs. And at that time, public affairs was one of the few jobs that you had to actually interview for. And you had to have pretty high on the ASVAB, which we all were not sure I was going to hit that bar. And I remember taking the ASVAB and Gunny Rodriguez getting the results and being like, oh, look at the brains on Bartley. Because again, that's not really And I'm not smart, but my personality is a lot more, I would say, just portrays other things, right?
The intangibles, Tabitha, the intangibles.
Yes. Yes. And so it was, it was public affairs, and I did the interviews, and I passed both the interviews. And then at that time I was coaching men's volleyball in high school. So I said I wouldn't leave before that season was over. And then ended up, I had to wait 5 months to join the delayed entry program, and then 11 months in, because, you go when your schoolhouse goes. So I was probably the person that was in the delayed entry program the longest at my recruiting station.
How did you stay motivated all that time?
I was always at the recruiting station with the recruiters doing stuff. My recruiter,
Smart.
yeah, my recruiter very much was my first mentor in the Marine Corps. And I, had a really unique experience where when I went to boot camp, every recruiter in that office wrote me at least one letter. And that normally doesn't happen. And they were just so professional. And for me, especially with my recruiter, it was probably one of the first times that I had like an older male role model that I had felt so comfortable with. I mean, I had some great male coaches growing up, don't get me wrong, but it was just like, it was very fatherly. He was very like fatherly. He wasn't old enough to be my father. So if he hears this, like, I'm not calling him old, guys. Like, Gunny Rod, I'm not calling you old. Forgive me. But he just very much, looked out for me that way. And so, and I don't know, there was just the beauty of the Marine Corps. Man, just the stories and the things and the uniform.
For sure, for sure. So, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on boot camp, but it must have been interesting in like your boot camp and Crucible MCT experience, recruit Bartley, public affairs. That must have gotten some extra attention, right? No?
No, not at all. And I was a little
Come
older.
on.
No, and I was a little older when I went to boot camp too. So as where my peers were kind of like crying and like it was emotionally hard, I loved boot camp. I thought it was hilarious, and I didn't laugh out loud, but the mental, it didn't affect me. My recruiter prepared me very, very well. There was really only one time in boot camp where I can remember, it was the rappel tower, which funny enough was the thing I was most excited about. But the instructor who was helping put on the straps was saying really inappropriate things to the females in front of me. And so when it got to me, he said something and I said something back. And he didn't like that. He caused a scene. He made it seem like, I was talking back to him and all of this stuff. And of course, the drill instructors instantly come over because they're not going to listen to me in that moment. And I remember that evening, though, my senior calling me over saying, okay, hey, what happened? And then like telling him like saying inappropriate stuff that was making other people uncomfortable. And I called him out on his shit. Like, awesome. Like, not scared of him. Cool. And it was just like the drill instructor didn't acknowledge it, but her face did. Do you know what I mean? Where it was just like, okay. And at some point, the series commander had talked to me about it. And I mean, that was it. I mean, again, it's not like it was something so devastating, right? Like that anything needed to happen besides like, cool that you think you can intimidate us, but not me.
No. Only reason I ask is the DIs I had loved messing with the air wing guys, and I was air wing, so for whatever reason, we got extra attention to make us harder.
And we are labeled as like, that the MOS at that time was called Combat Correspondent Public Affairs, and most people didn't know what it was. So when you see that, I don't think that they even like processed as we're like, okay, the air wing, right? Like swinging with the wing and all that, like whatever stuff. I don't know. But I don't really actually remember anybody really. I guess we talked about MOSs, but I guess I don't really remember that.
Well, it's all right. What was it like then? You go through your boot camp, which you loved. I thought my MOS school actually stunk worse than boot camp. It's a different story for a different time, but you go through your MOS school, and this is the thing, you're getting paid to like use cameras and record stuff, and you're getting paid for that.
Yeah, our schoolhouse is really, really hard though. So it was stressful in the sense of Like the fear of like, if you failed out, like you're gone. And it was really hard, like academically, the amount of work we had, just like, we were on a joint installation, so we were treated a lot different than the rest of the branches. As you know, like there has to be an example, right? So everything we did was like triple the amount of like stickler type stuff. But my schoolhouse was good. I absolutely loved it. The Defense Information School is like internationally known, recognized. I actually just went back a few months ago they did an alumni training day. I went back for additional training, which was awesome. So our schoolhouse is it's awesome. We're known as the DIMFO's trained killers. So it is very like, there's a whole presence there. There's a whole like camaraderie with being in that MOS and going to that schoolhouse.
So you're in the fleet now.
Yes.
You're either on a ship or you're on a base, and you get up on a Monday or Wednesday, do your PT, go to chow, go to your assigned duty station, and then you like go, you're the people coming up. How I say this? Oh yeah, we'd be out, by our launchers and radars doing our thing, and the little lance corporal with the officer and NCO would come, and the officer would talk to the other officers while the NCOs actually did all the work. I mean, surprise, surprise.
See,
and you guys took pictures and then went back in your air-conditioned vehicle back to main side, and the next couple of days would be in the paper.
well, and so my first duty station was actually Quantico. And so I was a private when I came to Quantico, or a PFC, maybe. PFC. But that was the last newspaper of the Marine Corps, and it was the greatest spot I could have started my career. We were busting out 10 to 12 stories a week, which compared to our peers in the field, nobody was doing the amount of stories that we were doing. And so, we didn't just take photos. We were taking photos. We were writing our stories. And my beat was security battalion. So I was covering everything the MPs were doing. I had a radio for security battalion, so I knew everything that was happening on base. And if I needed to show up to something, hurricane coverage when we had the hurricane and the earthquake and those type of things. So, and General Amos, I met his wife so many times that it would be awkward. We would be, somewhere and she would be there and she would come over and talk to me. And it was just like, as a PFC Lance Corporal, like, that's not exactly what you want, right? Like, awesome and cool moment. But it really, I think, though, it set our careers, and all of us, and my whole command there was like absolutely amazing. That will forever be my family. I can't say enough good things about my unit at Quantico. I learned so much.
Now, why do you say that was the last paper in the Marine Corps? I thought the Marine Corps still had a newspaper.
No? The last newspaper of the Marine Corps was disbanded. It was the Quantico Century, and it was disbanded back in 2014, 2015. It was the last weekly newspaper of the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps has no more newspapers. So there's like magazines, but that was the last newspaper of the Marine Corps.
All right. So I just learned a whole lot of new stuff in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So what's the Marine Times then? Because
that is not ran by Marines. That is ran by civilians. That is a completely separate entity that is not tied to the Marine Corps. They just take content that the Marine Corps has created and they have different journalists. That is not in any way associated with the Marine Corps or covered by the Marine Corps or overseen by the Marine Corps. And I say that, obviously you hear a little sass to my voice because
I was going to say,
because when I was in, they would often, which they've done a lot better now with it, but when I was in, they would often take our photos and not give us credit for our photos and use them for their stories. They have since done a lot better with giving the Marines the credit that they deserve for their images and stuff. But yeah, when I was in, you could often find your image without any byline, because as a federal entity, you don't own any of your images. The federal they're public. They're owned by the public. So anybody can do what they want with the images.
So just closing this loop, there's no more base papers anymore either. It's just, so the Yuma MCAS paper I have with my unit in it doing stuff, like it's not valuable, but that's like rare.
Yes.
That kind of, I don't know how I feel about that, Tabitha, because
I know.
All kidding aside, when Lance Cooley, Schmuckatelli was out there taking pictures and telling us to be all motivated, and we're like, dude, it's 121 out here. Take your picture and go stuff it. The next week when we actually he actually got like a good angle and There's us doing our job, and we bought it. Sure, that was ours. That meant
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, and in storytelling still exists, but it's changing. I mean, as you know, this whole field is changing, and so the Marine Corps has just had to change with it, digitize and use different outlets and entities. You can still, Divids, everybody's still posting all their story and all their content in Divids, but yeah, there's no more newspapers in the Marine Corps.
No digital, no. Wow. Okay.
Well, you can find everything on Marines.mil. They're all archived. So you can find all the archived stuff.
All right. Well, so how long were you in? It sounds like you had a unique path, and we all do, right? That's one of the things I like about. We'll talk about your podcast later. But you had a unique path in the Marine Corps. You had to perform at a high level, and perform well. And it sounds like you enjoyed your experience. Is that an accurate characterization?
Oh yeah, I absolutely loved my time in the Marine Corps. I didn't want to leave the Marine Corps. I had plans, at that time our MOS didn't have warrant officer, and I had hoped that one day the MOS would open back up warrant officer, and of course they did, but that was after I was injured and getting out of the Marine Corps. So, but it was an amazing career, and I learned so much, and Quantico was my baseline, but then so I told you when I joined, there was a Marine who was at every recruiting station. At that time, it was called the Marketing and Public Affairs Marine, who would do the first round of interviews for public affairs. And I wanted to do that job. When I was at Quantico, I got to take over the community relations program as a Lance Corporal, which was not common. Normally you were at least a sergeant at a minimum in that position. And I loved the community relations and the aspect of that. And so when, you're talking to your monitor and careers, it was what I wanted to do next. I wanted to go to recruiting duty to get that experience. It was kind of considered RB billet at that time. Not technically, we didn't get a recruiting ribbon for it, but it was very much career-wise. So few people did it because there's only 48 of those in the nation, that it's just great for your career. So I requested recruiting duty. However, I was technically a single parent because me and my husband were not married. We were dual military, and I refused for the Marine Corps to tell me when to get married. So I didn't, the Marine Corps wasn't going to tell me when to get married. And so when I applied for that, I was technically a single parent, and I was a corporal, which again, corporals rarely at that time got to go out on it. There was, I think, in MCRC at that time, one other corporal out of the 48. And so I had to jump through a lot of hoops and really fight to get that. And my command had to fight for me as well. And so I got that, but I ended up getting that opportunity, and I went to recruiting station Columbia and was their marketing and public affairs Marine. And that I learned so much in my first duty station, but on recruiting duty, the amount that you learn and the way you're able to embed yourself in a community, it was a very beautiful thing. And at that time, my husband, he had deployed to Djibouti, Africa. So I really was at that time a single parent by the time we moved. But yeah, it was a really great experience overall. I loved my time in the Marine Corps.
You talked about when we talked the first time on your show about your injury, and then and we've talked other times with other groups about what happened to you. I'm not saying you have to go into chapter and verse of what happened to you injury wise, but it completely changed the trajectory of what you were trying to do in your Marine Corps career and personal life, and it led to your transition out of the Marine Corps. Kind of just describe what that time was like, please.
Yeah. So after having my third child, 6 weeks at that time, 6 weeks you're physically cleared to return back to full duty. And so I was cleared 6 weeks, and then got a phone call that the Rucking Raiders, which is an organization that does, rucks marches across the nation for recognition of the Raiders, was going to be coming through Columbia, South Carolina, and our recruiting substation and their police were going to do an 8-mile piece of it. I'm the only one who does photography and all of that. And so I get my camera pack and I go. So 6 weeks postpartum, I go on an 8-mile hike, following them around, taking photos. And the next day I ended up in the emergency room. Worse pain than I had ever been in my life, worse pain than labor. And all my kids were born naturally, and ended up with multiple organ prolapses. So my uterus and my bladder were literally falling out of my body. If you know anything about military medical, it is very hard to get any sort of medical care that is considered specialty care, and women's health, OBGYN, gyno is all considered specialty care. So you can't just make a gyno appointment or an OBGYN appointment. And since I was cleared 6 weeks, I had to essentially go to TRICARE, get an appointment with my PCM, for them to refer me to gyno and validate that it was worth me going to gyno, for then the gynecologist to tell me that what was wrong with me was so severe that he couldn't fix me and there was nothing that he could do, to then have to get back to your PCM to get another referral to a specialist. And so this took, as you can imagine, months of fighting. And this whole time, I don't really have a good answer of what's going on, right? Or what the solution is or what this means. And on top of that, I can hardly stand for more than 15 minutes without severe pain. My anxiety, I'm having panic attacks, just my world, no better way to say besides it felt like it was crumbling. And on top of this, it wasn't like I could talk about it, or I didn't feel like I could talk about it. I had had previous hip injuries that I could talk about. I had previous other health stuff that I could talk about. But the minute I said that, it was almost like it made people so uncomfortable, or they didn't understand that all of a sudden it was just like I couldn't even talk about what was going on. And for me, I think that was really hard because I had had such great commands my entire career, where oftentimes I was able to talk about what I was going through and all of that. So it was just all of that. And then to the realization of, when this is happening, I had orders to Okinawa, and I didn't know what was medically going on. I was so scared that it's like, well, we can't go to Okinawa because what is going to be can't even get anything fixed here and I'm in America. What's going to happen when I go over there? And so the question of going up on a med board in that process, the doctor who was evaluating whether or not I could go on a med board, and this is 4 days before my EAS, 4 days before the Marine Corps is kicking me out. That's how long it took. It took almost a year of fighting and fighting and fighting. Didn't examine me, didn't look at any of the stuff, was just like, organ prolapse. Oh, plenty of women live with it. It's not life or death. The VA can fix you. Mind you, I can't stand for more than 15 minutes. I'm in severe pain. I do not have full control of my bodily functions. That's the best, most polite way I can say it. But it wasn't life or death. So I didn't rate going on a med board, which is, there's plenty of people who going on a med board does not mean it's life or death. That is not what a medical board means in any capacity. And so now, I'm here. I'm 4 days before my EAS. And yes, this whole time I've been preparing for transition, but I didn't know when I was going to get out. I didn't know when my last day was going to be. And oh, by the way, my husband got out of the Navy so I could stay in the Marine Corps because my career was progressing so much more faster than his. And we couldn't do the dual military being two different branches, because at that time they did not try to keep you together in any capacity. And that's not the life we wanted for our children. And so he took that sacrifice, got out, and then this happens. So not only that, I'm the single breadwinner. And where are you going to go? What are you going to do?
So I mean, this isn't just a simple TAPS class you can sit in and get all the answers you need. You're not getting the specialized care that you also need too. What did happen? Because you're living with pain, which affects you, and I'm very familiar with that, believe it or not. And I'm also familiar with same different thing. I injured my patella really bad in the Marine Corps, but what they said is, look, we're not going to med board you. We're going to kick you out, and with an honorable, because we're not giving you the med board, because by the time we dig in there and operate, it's not worth it to us. My MOS was canceled.
Yeah.
And so it's like, look, we just soon, give you a VA rating, go to the VA, and you take your honorable discharge, go in peace. And it really was like, wait a minute. But that's how it is. It's a very cold, unemotional process. But you're having to process all this, and the fact that it's like over, like you're not going to get your warrant officer rank. You're not going to be able to do your career. And oh yeah, by this a bonus, you've got 3 kids.
Yep.
How did you start making sense of all this, Tabitha?
The first thing I did, I tried to put a congressional inquiry in because that was the only way in my mind of 4 days, what can I do? And if I can't do something to stop this, what can I do to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody else? Because there's no way that this is just happening to me. How nonchalant it all was, and just like no accountability. So I put a congressional inquiry in, and my elected official decided that it just give it to the intern, and that it wasn't, he didn't need to do anything with it. And so at that point, it was just like, honestly, I felt so hopeless. And oh, by the way, this is triggering. So my injuries then started triggering complex migraines, which imitate strokes. And so it wasn't just like one health thing, right? Now I'm dealing with a multitude of health things. And so I moved back home. My grandma was kind enough to let us move in with her, and where, I had more of a support system. And my husband, he was a welder, so he right away was able to get a welding job. I was bartending at a establishment where my mom and brother had bartended. My brother was a bartender there, and so the owner knew what I was struggling with, and so I was able to, sit down, do all those things. But even still, I mean, it was a complete struggle. And so I was lucky enough to get a job interview at Purdue University on the fundraising side of the house, and got a job offer there. And that saved my life. And one of my concerns with leaving the Marine Corps, on top of all of this physical stuff, I found my authentic self in the Marine Corps. I found how I could be, blunt Bartley. As long as I used tack, I could say whatever I wanted. I was able to, be, I don't want to say abrasive, but be aggressive. As a female, I could be aggressive. I could do these things. And I wasn't crash or anything. It was just like, I essentially talked the same way that my male peers did when it came to like, well, this isn't going to work because it's not going to work, and here's the solution type stuff, right? I didn't put flowers on things that didn't need flowers. And so I was very concerned that I would find a place that I could even be me. And so I think I really started covering up a lot of things about myself, my personality, what I talked about. There was this huge fear. Indiana is a state where they can fire you for any reason. And although Purdue University is a great place, that was always a fear in the back of my mind, because, by the way, the VA isn't a fast process. So guess what? I'm technically not disabled. So I can't get accommodations because I'm not disabled. And so I'm at a job, brand new, with not a ton of leave, right? Like all of these things. And yet I have to try and get my VA claim. And oh, by the way, Indiana only has one VA, and it's an hour from me. We have clinics, so we only have one VA to do the processing. Or you can go to Illinois. It's Indianapolis or Danville, Illinois. Those are your options. And so going through that whole process, I say for me, like, the transition was the most mentally, physically, and emotionally challenging time of my life. I don't like to say that I was suicidal, but I felt like such a burden, and I was so scared of dying, and I had all this anxiety of it. But there was a moment where I thought maybe it would be better if I wasn't there. Maybe my family wouldn't have such the burden. Maybe my kids wouldn't be so traumatized by, watching me be taken away in an ambulance multiple times, and seeing me not being able to function. And so, it was really hard. And, there was a moment specifically where I didn't see an answer. I didn't feel like I had the fight anymore. And I say this with, I had the most amazing support system of family and friends, right? I had this massive support system. But on this day, it was a, fellow Marine who reached out to me, kind of was seeing what was going on. And it kind of, kicked me back to, if I'm struggling this much mentally with all of this and fighting this, I can't imagine what somebody's going through who doesn't have the support I have. And so that led me to start, what can I do? What can I do to make sure that somebody else doesn't experience what I did? And so started an organization for women veterans there, just like a small group in Lafayette, and it just kind of expanded, and I started sharing my story more. And then I started meeting other females who had the same injuries as me and who had been fighting the same battle, to where up to this point, I didn't think that this was something that was common. And it was way more common. It's just they didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about it because it's a taboo subject. And so that was kind of where, I guess, where it started. And then it ended up, the more I shared my story, I ended up sharing my story on podcast. And after one podcast, another female veteran asked if I wanted to run for office. And I was like, well, nope, Blunt Bartley here. Like, nope, last person you want running for office. I don't know what you're thinking. But one thing led to another, and I ended up running for state senate. And that was an experience as somebody who's not politically driven, but it was just, there were so many things in Indiana specifically, and, coming back to your hometown, and when you're experiencing your elected officials not doing the job they're supposed to do, and you're seeing, in Indiana, there's like only 6 hospitals that deliver babies in the entire state. There's I had to travel over 45 minutes to a hospital to deliver my baby, and wasn't sure if I would, have a baby in a cornfield type thing. All of my maternity care. Yeah.
So you have I was born in Evansville.
Mm-hmm.
You got Terre Haute, Gary, Indianapolis,
and Tippecanoe County, Lafayette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we both know it's like farmland out there, and I get that, but that's just, I mean,
right. And for there not to be anything like doulas or midwife, you know what I mean? Some sort of like in between, and there's those rural areas that, like, in emergencies or in those type of situations, should be able to handle that. There's not that. And so when I was seeing that and seeing like so many of these things, that it's like, you guys need a Marine that's less worried about politics and what party, and is more worried about, like, here's the problem, here's the solution. And so I ended up running for office in 2020, which was an experience. It was a good experience. I learned a lot from it. I have no desire to run again, but it was really, I think, the catalyst of me realizing that I could do more and make an impact, and there were these different ways. So that was kind of like the, I guess, starting point of it. And Purdue, I can't say enough good things about Purdue and how much they supported me. It was just, I think, like, sometimes you're not ready for the support, or you don't think you're ready, or you don't think that. I think for me, part of it was like, well, there's people who've experienced way worse than I have, right? Like, that's always the, like, they need it more. So yeah.
This is why I love doing this kind of stuff, is because you just meet people who have had a very different path and real challenges to overcome. And I live in a part of the country where there's like 6 hospitals within a 10-mile radius, literally. South Shore, Brockton, Signature Healthcare, and then there's a couple small ones, at least 4 in a 10-mile radius.
But they may not deliver babies.
All of them deliver babies.
Oh, well, see, yeah, rural Indiana. I mean, that's it's when we're talking the healthcare inequality in this nation, and especially when it comes to women and children, and then even more so for minority women, specifically like Black women, and you look at the rate of like their death, there's no excuse for it. There really, really isn't. And so that, on top of the dog and pony show of pretending like we care for veterans, but the actual legislation and what's being passed and how veterans were treated in the state, those are things that I was super passionate about, and I was literally living through it. And so who better to run for office and to make change happen than somebody who's like literally living through it, literally impacted by it. And so ran for office. It was a good experience.
You bring up a point, and you brought it before in other discussions. The last time you talked about it was like the Tip of the Spear show with David Willis Jr. is the fact that we have people who say, yeah, we're pro-veterans, but when you look at their voting record or look at the legislation they have put forth, it's kind of like, wait a minute, this doesn't even cover the bare necessities, and not that vets looking for a handout, but just to get on the same playing field as somebody who's had time in their civilian career to accrue different benefits and things like that. It kind of makes you wonder what our priorities are, and
Yeah.
you've seen it up close. What's that like to you, in terms of you ran once and you got to see the other side of the curtain? You don't have any desire to do it again.
I don't.
Yeah.
And part of it is Indiana, I know so intimately. I think like the community and the like what the needs are, that is a big part of it. I had no desire ever federal, like in any capacity. But in Indiana, there was stuff that it was like, as Hoosiers, like I believe like we can change this. And I believe if people really opened their eyes and saw what was happening and what their elected officials were voting on and the legislation that was being passed, like for example, in 2020, this is COVID, there was some bill about hairdressers and chemicals or something, and something with hairdressers. And in that bill, the day, or like it was a week before it was like going, they snuck in a piece about an Indiana veteran businesses got some like tax exemption or some fee that they didn't have to pay. And so they snuck that in the hairdresser bill thinking that, oh, veterans are all men, so they won't see this. And so that type of thing, right? Just, I mean, it really highlights how you really feel. I don't care if you show up to our Veterans Day, celebration. I don't care if you show up to Memorial Day, if then you are, not doing congressional inquiries the way you should be. If you are not monitoring what your state VA is doing, if you are trying to push legislation secretly, I don't care if you pass these, recognition days and all of these things. That's a dog and pony show that it just doesn't equal the negative impact you're making.
So, what do we do about that? Because I believe that it's the old adage is still true. All politics is local. And so it really fires me up when I have a veteran like, I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to go down to a city council meeting. And I'm like, well, if you're not going to do it here, it's not going to happen at the federal level. It's just not. I don't want to bother with it. I'm going to go watch football, or I'm going to go watch I'm going to go. You can't be on the sideline anymore.
No, you
Seems
can't.
like.
And you're right. Like the local is really like these local races and these things that are happening locally. Like you should know those people anyway. Like they're the ones who are making decisions. They're the ones who are doing like the most decisions that impact you. And it is our due diligence to know. And, I get it because like I'm I'm super anti like the two-party system. I don't believe in a loyalty to the party. I think that is just absolutely wild. Right? But tear it all down. But like you can't just tear it all down. Oh, and if you want to, well, then you have to do something, right? You have to vote, you have to run for office then. If you don't feel like there's somebody good enough for you to vote for, then run for office or support and encourage somebody who you feel is. Support their campaign to run for office. Because like I ran at the state Senate level. I had never ran for any other position. This whole concept too of you have to start at the bottom. Well, my skill sets, no, the budgeting and all of that, that's not where my skill sets lie. That like, I don't think that when it comes to these elected positions that you just have to start at the bottom because that's what's been done before. Is that where your skill sets lie? Okay, well then great. Awesome if it is. But there's no reason for somebody to not run for a position that they are qualified for, or that there's initiatives and change that needs to happen that they could drive that. And I also am a huge advocate. There needs to be term limits across the board on everything. I do not think that anybody should be able to make a career out of politics. Period.
I don't think our forefathers thought that this was supposed to be a lifetime deal. In fact, if you look at the first 20 to 40 years of our country, they would come in for a term, serve their term, and get back to their farm, their business, whatever. But they had to make the most impact they could in that 4, maybe 8 years, and then go back to it. I don't think we'd have some of these. I mean, some of these politicians, 40, 50 years, and they're only making $100,000 a year, but yet their net worth is in the millions. It smells. It does.
Yeah.
So I definitely get what you're saying there. I think it needs to be revisited, but it's funny, the people who have the power don't want to give it up. So how do we answer that? It becomes a rabbit hole that this is why I go back to local.
Yep.
Let's get involved locally, and then start growing at the state and federal level.
I completely agree.
You're doing your mom, wife, you work, you're an advocate, you've run for office, and then you decided to start the Oath We Took podcast amongst everything else, Tabitha.
I know.
And I get the blocker from the PR person. We got a new podcast. I'll check it out. I'm like, oh, Marine Corps podcast, Marine Corps veteran, who does Marines only. I'm like, well, it kind of does make sense that you want to only talk to Marines. But I kind of got to dig into that a little bit. Like, do you limit yourself by only talking to Marines in your podcast? Give me the deets. Give me the intel.
I don't feel so. And I have had a few other guests, but they were all Marine Corps related. So the Marine Corps does the educators workshop. I brought 3 of my educators on who had gone with me to talk about that. I've had one spouse on, and eventually I will have FMF sailors on the podcast. However, I won't have an FMF sailor until my husband, who's obviously my favorite FMF sailor, tells his story. But no, the reason why for the Marine Corps podcast was, one, I miss telling the Marine Corps story, and specifically Marines. And I knew I didn't have the capacity to write stories because the amount of time it takes for the interviews and interviewing the multiple people and all of that. I knew I didn't have that capacity. And I had been on enough podcasts at that point, and a PR background, that I was like, well, that should be not easy enough, but I think enough of the skill sets to start this. And at the minimum, I'm going to digitize people's story, right? They'll be out there. And another piece of it is I wanted to tell the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it with at the end of the day, I loved my time in the Marine Corps, but there are things that the Marine Corps needs to change, should change. There are improvements that could be made. And I guess I kind of looked at it like a marriage where you should always be working at it, right? Your marriage is not gonna just be
no, don't make
perfect
me do
all the
this.
time.
Don't make me do this. Don't make me do this.
So, but realistically, any relationship here, I'll put it that way, not marriage, any relationship, you put work into it, right? Whether it's a friend, anything. And it is what it is. And so I also didn't feel like there was enough honest conversations when it came to kind of what the Marine Corps should do, or conversations that weren't being talked about. And it kind of goes back to, so when I was in the Marine Corps, again, Blunt Bartley here, hey, I was a sexual assault victim advocate. And that time in, I want to say, 2014, 2015, the Marine Corps had a sexual assault issue. Hardcore. And I was on recruiting duty. And some of the recruiters talked about it honestly, some didn't. And I remember making a post on my social media that was sharing my story. I had never been sexually assaulted in the Marine Corps, but I had been sexually harassed multiple times. And I talked about how every time I had been sexually harassed, it never went further because of the male Marines around me who would never allow anything to stand, would never allow for any sort of behavior. And so I always felt safe. And not everybody had that experience, obviously. But so I posted about it. I talked about it. But I said at the same time, the Marine Corps does have a problem, and we can't pretend it doesn't. And being scared to talk about it is just as bad as the doing it. Allowing something to stay hidden is just as bad. And so I, posted, and at that time, I'm friends, Facebook era, friends with the CO, like everybody in the command's friends, they're all connected. CO likes it, Sergeant Major likes it, like everybody in the rest of the command crew likes it. And this gunny comes in trying to intimidate me in my own office. I'll stand at parade rest, and on recruiting duty, things are calm. Okay. Like, yes, I'm a corporal, but like things were calm. Like you wouldn't just, yeah. So it's more relaxed feel, and trying to intimidate me and just like, that's bullshit, what you're posting and all of these things. And I'm just like, okay, Gunny, maybe you should go talk to the CO. He liked it. Red face, just like, meh, goes running to the XO, and the XO, says the same thing. There's nothing inappropriate with it. And I say all that to say, on the educators workshop, when we would take educators to Paris Island, we would have these very deep conversations. And my educators were having this conversation with me. We had a whole separate conversation, and it gave them more confidence in the Marine Corps. That a female in the Marine Corps was willing to talk about it, willing to share their experience, and that there, to know that there weren't people who were just not talking about it and pretending like it didn't exist. Because it's, it's happening everywhere, not just in the Marine Corps, but yes, super problem in the Marine Corps at that time. And so that kind of spurred me I realized that I had this ability to oftentimes lead sometimes harder conversations that people don't want to have, or they have perceptions, and challenging those perceptions in a way that somebody is able to listen, not with the goal of them changing. I don't need people to change. I just need them to listen, right? Most often I feel like that's what we kind of fail at, is listening to people and realizing that it doesn't have to result in a change of all of beliefs or any of these things. And so I thought the Marine Corps and telling Marine stories was the perfect way, because our stories are so unique. We have, like, I've had so many guests that have had such a wide variety of experiences. And I thought that beyond just having their stories digitized, their stories hold value. And I thought that, more people than just Marines could get value from these stories of resiliency and problem solving. And I think that the thing with all of the episodes, even, some lean more positive than others. Some are, more adversity maybe, or, it hit them a little harder. But everybody had well, here's what could change, right? Here's how I would fix it, or here's what I did to fix it, or, not just this like, well, it sucks, and that was it. And so I think that kind of common denominator of hearing that and hearing those things. And then I don't know any Marine that doesn't love Marines. They may be mad at the Marine Corps. They may hate the Marine Corps. They may hate all of these things, but I don't know any Marines who don't, just love Marines and feel an instant connection to Marines.
I would agree. I've gotten asked several times, hey, are you mad at the Marine Corps for what they did with your MOS and what they did, for you there? Honestly, for the first couple of years, I was pretty ticked. I'm like, of all the places to put me, why put me there?
Yeah.
Was I upset when I got hurt and the way I got out? I'm like, no, not really. I don't blame the Marine Corps for that. Because I both knew people who went to boot camp who didn't have the first week of boot camp and they were done. They just physically something happened to them and they were done. And I said, I've known guys who served 20 years and maybe got a bruise or a bump. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how they just not waltz through, but like not a scratch.
Yeah.
and the person next to them is a physical wreck, and I can't explain why. So I don't get to that level. I try to tell people, like, look, my time in the Marine Corps was short, but there's a whole lot I got out of the Marine Corps that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. And for as long as I was in, I'd like to think that, I represented the Marine Corps well. And, there's something about Marines. We're at a veterans thing last year for Veterans Day, and the Air Force didn't know their birthday. They didn't know their song. They had no idea when they actually came into existence. And I'm like, that stuff is drilled into your head right after you get off the yellow footprints. You will never forget that. Like that's the difference.
It is.
That's the difference. So I like listening to it. I'll get a chuckle, in some ways. You and I have we all have very similar experiences in the Marine Corps. In some ways, it's widely different. I mean, no recruiter ever called me, Tabitha, just to let you know. But one did. One said, I'm gonna call this hard charger up and see what she'll do. And sure enough, you're here now. I mean, I guess my last question for the night is, well, okay, I'll ask that question last. Here, I want to like this. How can people connect with what you're doing with the Oath You Took podcast and, support you if possible?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn. The Oath We Took podcast is on all streaming platforms. So anywhere that podcasts are, you can find us. And then we air every Monday, 5 p.m. on Wreaths Across America Radio. And then every Tuesday, live on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, 7 p.m. So those are probably the easiest ways. And you can just Google Oath We Took podcast and it'll pop up as well.
Love Jeff Pearson being on Wreaths Across America Radio.
Yes. And that was something so I started my podcast with no aspirations of like never getting money. Like I'm just doing my thing, right? Like cuss all you want, do all you want. And then had the opportunity to be on Wreaths Across America came up and I was just like, this is amazing. Go back and edit everything. So I can't thank Wreaths Across America enough, one, for like what they do in general, but like to have a platform where somebody like me, who's not doing a podcast as a job, career, or like making any money off of it, where these Marine stories can be amplified even more. There is just like, I don't think I can thank them enough for that, because there's days where it's like, I could be doing a lot more, but as you said, like I do a lot of things. And it's like, but I know that with this Wreaths Across America audience, that so many people are hearing these Marine stories that never would have heard their stories. They wouldn't have.
That is for sure. And just the whole way it's done and the commitment to people like you and me just makes it all worth it. So I'm happy you're a fellow hostee on that network. So last question I want to ask you is, well, maybe a question and a half is, you've been through the fire and flames, right? You've been through the crucible. I went to MCT, but would you do it again?
In a heartbeat. No hesitation. As corny as this is, I've kind of like lived my whole life with like these like two things. Like I want to make my mark on the world and not apologize for it. And then, I'm a 90s child. So Mr. Feeney was like my life inspiration of like, do good in the world, not do well, do good. And I felt like I did that in the Marine Corps. And I feel like the Marine Corps gave me the foundation to continue to do that. I wouldn't have the skill sets I have or the ability to, use tact or the leadership skills that I developed in the Marine Corps. I don't like to say the Marine Corps changed me, because I don't really feel like it did. I think instead it allowed me to be my authentic self in a way that people could actually process, maybe.
Well, I think that's the thing. It gave you the confidence to be your authentic self. You have nothing to apologize for in your life, and a lot of people never get past that.
Yeah.
They never let their authentic selves show. So, oorah, oorah. And then I promise this is the last question. You go through life, and for me, it's my children, having my children. But I'll tell people all the time, I said some of the best days of my life were, we're out there in the desert, making scrambled eggs on our radars and Humvees, dirty, smelly, tired, and we're having a great time, and there's nothing like it.
There isn't. I always make the joke of, how like some people say they wish they could go back to high school, or like a lot of people. For me, it's like, not that I want to go back, because again, I love my children, love my life. But if I had to pick a time frame, it wouldn't be high school for me. It would be my first duty station at Quantico. There was something so beautiful about growing up that way around the people that I was, and the development that it gave me, that I I wouldn't change anything about what happened by any means, but definitely like that's more, I guess, my golden era, high school.
Nice. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I will have the links to the Oak We Took podcast and the Awesome Mike Radio show post. I want to thank you, Tabitha, for coming on and talking with me. I feel chesty, smedley, you know.
Alpha May.
Would look down and be pleased with the conversation they heard. You know, wherever you are, Chesty, good night. We love you. And as we say in Awesome Mike Radio, we're mission in flight.
Remember on and teach is our mission. We care about it and we do it every day. But I think there are things that just hit you and give you a reason to go on. The theme for our 2024 for Wreaths Across America is Live with Purpose. It just seemed to fit in with the vows of the wreath, the 10 attributes that we feel represent our United States military. I thought, what a great opportunity to put those two things together and show our kids through how we act some of the things that can make their lives better, their communities better, and by doing that, the country better. For me, Live with Purpose, I think, it's a mindset. Set some guidelines and then go out and purposefully make life different, make a change. It's an opportunity to set an example.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load Co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.